Let's welcome in now Pennsylvania Congressman Guy Reschenthaler. Now he's a member of the House Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committees. Guy, great to see you again.
Thanks, John, and thanks for just calling me Guy. Good to be with you.
Yeah, I finally got the hang of it. I'm used to it now. Even though you are a congressman, it's hard for me to do that, but since you insist, I will do it. But let's talk about this. So many questions that are not going to be answered through this special select committee here. Who killed Ashley Babbitt? Who planted the bombs at the RNC and the DNC? Why didn't the FBI's warning about a war at the Capitol prompt the appropriate response from Capitol Police and Nancy Pelosi? Why was the National Guard turned down? And we could go on. But when you only have Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney representing Republicans, we're not going to get answers to those questions, are we?
Well, that's exactly right. And John, you know who would have asked those questions?
Yeah, Jim Jordan.
Jim Banks.
Jim
Jordan. Right. Troy Nels. The Republicans that Leader McCarthy selected to be on the commission would have asked those tough probative questions. But let's get something straight. This is not about getting to the truth. This is not a real investigation. This is political theater. This is a way for Nancy Pelosi to control the narrative, to talk about what happened on January 6th rather than what's going on in the streets right now. Rising crime rates, inflation that's hitting the working class incredibly hard, chaos on the southern border, aggressive adversaries abroad. As long as Nancy Pelosi and the mainstream media is talking about January 6th, they're not talking about the disastrous policies in the absolute chaos that's going on in the White House. That's what this is really about, John.
Yeah, they're also not talking about audits in Arizona and Pennsylvania and places like that. We'll talk about that in a second, but I want to focus on some new polling about specifically the January 6th investigation here. It comes to us from Politico. It shows that support is declining quite a bit. 66% in June. Now it's down to 58%. It also shows big declines among independents and Republicans. I mean, that's what's going to happen, Guy, when you have such a patently it is bipartisan, I guess, by definition, but it's anti-Trump, and I think it's very much anti the Trump supporters who were there peacefully on that day.
Well, I actually wouldn't call it bipartisan, just because you have two anti-Trump never-Trumpers on the committee.
It's like a bino, bipartisan in name only, I guess.
There you go. One thing, John, I've learned in Washington, D.C., whenever you hear something being called nonpartisan or bipartisan, it means there's a bunch of Democrats and Republican-hating Republicans that comprise whatever committee it is. But I digress. But you're absolutely right. The public does not care, and their support for this commission is waning and dropping. It's because every time they go to a gas station, they're paying more money. Every time they go to the grocery store, they're paying more money because of inflation. They're worried about getting mugged in the streets. These are legitimate concerns of everyday Americans. They want to look forward. They don't want to look into the past. And if we are looking in the rearview mirror, why aren't we talking about Kenosha? Why aren't we talking about the $2 billion worth of damage that the BLM rioters and the Antifa protesters did all last summer? No one is talking about that. There's a lot of answers that should be answered as well if we're going to go ahead and investigate the past.
I mean, to be fair, Guy, we did hear Adam Kinzinger talk about that, though, but in a mocking way, like mocking you for even bringing that up. And I think a lot of people, whose lives were destroyed in Kenosha, Wisconsin, or other places, they think that's a perfectly valuable and important question to ask.
Right. Well, it's because I don't want to speculate as to Adam Kinzinger's reason for doing that. It's sad that he's parroting Nancy Pelosi's talking points. But, we went back to voting the day of January 6th or early in the morning of January 7th. I'm not diminishing what happened, but we went back to normal business within a matter of hours. If you had a store that was looted, if you were attacked, if you had a loved one that was seriously injured last summer, you didn't recover that quickly. So why are we now demeaning people that are asking about investigating the chaos and the riots and looting that took place all last summer, just not the day of January 6th? But again, I digress. The American public wants to look forward. They want solutions to inflation. They want order at the southern border. They want adversaries abroad to be contained. They want China to be held accountable for what likely leaked from a lab in Wuhan, this virus. That's what the American people are worried about. They're not worried about what happened on January 6th. And if they are, they're worried about the larger context of the political violence we saw all last summer.
And again, and I'm not discounting, as you're not trying to do this either. There were some horrible things that happened at the Capitol on January 6th, and we saw the video evidence of that today. But what's happening, especially with the testimony from these police officers, is they are lumping everybody in together, and I worry what that does to the investigation, because you and I both want to hold these folks accountable, the ones who were violent, the ones who entered this. But there does seem to be a miscarriage of justice when it comes to everybody getting lumped in together. President Trump Trump also slamming Nancy Pelosi's committees. We have some statements from him on the screen. I mean, people have obviously seen these already, but I want to focus on something that House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy had to say yesterday when he was asked about this committee. Here's that clip.
She's broken Congress. I mean, and then it just makes the whole committee a sham, so the outcome predetermined. You won't get to the bottom.
And in your mind, you don't think it's fair because of that?
No, not my mind. It's probably most all Americans' minds.
I mean, broken Congress, you can comment on that, but I think, you know, what we have seen that's missing today is when you don't have the defense, let's just use that for lack of a better term here. It's the same thing as in a criminal case. The reason why you want someone who appears guilty is the end of the day, like Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. The reason why you want them to have a real defense here is because we want to ensure due process. There is no semblance of due process on this committee today based on what we've seen so far, Guy.
You're exactly right. And if there was a semblance of due process, you would have allowed Jim Banks and Jim Jordan and the others to sit on that committee to ask those probative questions that we discussed at the beginning of the interview. Because Pelosi refuses to seat anybody that has questions that counter her narrative, it shows that this is a sham investigation. This is hyper partisan, and it's what Nancy Pelosi ultimately wants. She wants one party rule, not just in this committee, but in Congress and in the entire nation. That's what their H.R. 1 bill is about. I digress. But this party, Nancy Pelosi, they're drunk on the idea of one party rule and total political dominance. And you see that as a microcosm in this commission that she set up. And then she has the gall of calling it bipartisan because you have Pelosi Republicans sitting on that committee that really should be, frankly, caucusing with Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, not with the new Republican Party.
Right. And, you can these guys throw around terms like sedition and insurrection and incitement of violence, but you can check the DOJ database yourself. It is online. There are no charges of sedition yet, no charges of insurrection, no charges of inciting violence. There are some assaulting officer charges.
And John, if I could just say this.
Yeah.
And if they were really worried about a true investigation, they wouldn't have this. And if they were worried about those charges, they wouldn't have this investigation. Because just after 9/11, we didn't have a commission until months after. Right. Because you didn't want anything to interfere with the prosecution investigation. Right. They know nobody is going to get charged with this.
Right. I'm going to talk to Brett Tolman about that. He's a former federal prosecutor, but you have these accusations being made by these law enforcement officers in uniform in a public forum on the record. Very subjective statements, a lot of, equivocating and accusations and stuff without the evidence to back it up. And I wonder what that does to these criminal cases down the road. But let's set that aside because there's one more topic I want to talk about you with, and that is election integrity. And here's President Trump. Here's what he told Benny Johnson this past weekend in Phoenix about this issue. Take a listen.
It was a corrupt election. Everyone knows it. It was then stolen, and they planned it. They didn't want to have another 2016, and they said, we're not going to let it happen again. It's actually a disgrace. There's never been a thing like this in our country. Now you look at Georgia, what they're finding in Georgia. Look at Wisconsin. Look at Pennsylvania, really bad. Philadelphia was so bad. And Detroit speaks for itself. Detroit speaks for itself. Detroit was a mess.
Now, this is what the Democrats and a lot of the media call the big lie, what President Trump just said right there. But I want to focus on a recent Rasmussen Reports poll. It shows 55% of the country now support the forensic audits to ensure there was no voter fraud. 29% oppose the audits. But 55%, Guy, that's a pretty big number. That's a majority of the country.
Well, that's because most Americans understand that in a democracy, you have to have faith in the election results. If you don't have faith in the elections, then you don't have a representative government. It's that simple. And let me be clear about something. When it comes to elections, whether it's one where a Republican or a Democrat won, every voice needs heard. Every vote needs counted. Every vote needs verified. Every verified vote needs counted. That's all Republicans want. That's what Democrats should want. The fact is, in 2016, you had a lot of Democrats not accepting the results of 2016. In 2020, you have a lot of Republicans not accepting the results of 2020. That is not a good thing moving forward. We need to do something to make sure people have faith in the elections, there's integrity. But it's just not about the electoral system. It's also about the media and how they work hand in glove with the Democrat Party, hand in glove with big tech to suppress stories. Remember, we were called conspiracy theorists when we were talking about Hunter Biden being investigated by the DOJ. He actually was being investigated for 2 years. There was incriminating evidence on the laptop. And yet that story was suppressed. I was shadow banned on social media for talking about Hunter Biden and his connections with Ukraine. I retweeted the New York Post story that was suppressed. That does not sit well either with a lot of people when they see big tech, big media, and the Democrat Party working hand in glove to suppress information. That is a problem, and that clearly affected 2020.
Yeah, they always throw out baseless, no evidence of this stuff. But the question is, are you okay with the Secretary of State and the governor of Pennsylvania changing election laws at the last minute without the proper legislative tactics? And what's going on in Arizona? Are you okay with what happened in Georgia with the loss of chain of custody documents? They can't prove that. This is stuff that folks want to get cleared up. Guy, great to see you as always. Thanks so much.
Hey, you too, John.
We'll talk
Thanks
to you
for
soon.
having me on.
All right, thanks. Thank you as well. All right.